I visible? Am I audible?
Hello.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning.
Let's begin our session for today. Keep your back and neck straight, sit comfortably. When you feel ready, very gently close your eyes. Just start watching your breath. Watch the natural flow of your breathing as you inhale and as you exhale. Slowly shift your attention to your body. Become aware of the posture. Check your alignment and adjust your body so that you are correctly aligned. Make sure that you are both comfortable and stable in the posture you have chosen. And now come back to your breathing. Begin to consciously deepen your breath. Relax the mind with each passing breath. Prepare yourself for chanting Om 3 times, followed by 3 Shantis. Take a deep inhalation for Om. Shanti, Shanti. Feel the vibrations. Join both your palms together and begin to rub both your palms. Keep your palms on your eyes. Very slowly, while blinking and looking at your palms, begin to open up your eyes and come back with a big smile. Namaste, everyone. Let us begin our session for today. So, yesterday we have talked about the origin of yoga, and today we are going to discuss the history and development of yoga. These few topics will help you to actually understand how we have gotten to the modern times when it comes to yoga, right? So today we are going to see how with the changing time, yoga also transformed and it took the form which was most suitable for the people at that point of time, right? So our main division is done in 3 time periods, and the main actually the basis on which the 3 divisions come in is on the systematization of the process of yoga, right? So I have briefly mentioned this before as well. The Patanjali Yoga Sutra. This was the text which came in and it systematized the entire process of yoga, right? So the time period before this text was quite unsystematized, or everything was scattered here and there, right? There were different sources from which you could read, there were different sources from which you could gather the information, but a proper path wasn't laid out, right? So the time for the timing before the Yoga Sutras were formulated, it is known as the pre-classical period. So this period is the time before 500 BC, right? All the time before 500 BC is broadly categorized into the pre-classical period. Now from 500 BC till 800 AD, this is the generally accepted time. Okay, this is called the classical period. From 500 BC till 800 AD. This timeline, generally by historians, this timeline is accepted as the timeline of the classical period. It is within this timeline that the Yoga Sutras were written. Right. Then, broadly speaking, the time after the classical period is called post-classical period. This is the time after 800 AD. Right. And then this post-classical period, as it comes closer to today's time, it is also like given two more categories, right? One is the modern modern period and then the contemporary. Okay, so this is a part of the post-classical only, but because we have come very, very close to our current timeline, so the modern period and the contemporary period are two divisions which help us to see very closely why we are doing what we are doing currently when it comes to yoga, right? So these are the 5 timelines that you broadly need to know about. So we'll discuss each and every one of them in depth so that we can understand how the process, what was the initial intention of the process of yoga, how it began, and now with the changing times, what it has come down to, right? So in the pre-classical period, we'll start with the first one, which is pre-classical period. In this time period, generally speaking, everything was scattered, right? So the major forms of information were, I told you in the philosophy beginning of the classes, Vedas are the oldest Indian scriptures, right? So Vedas and then Upanishads, sorry, Upanishads, Vedas, Upanishads, these became the major source or the major backing. So all the processes that you read in the systematized form of yoga, they are present in the Vedas and the Upanishads, but they are quite scattered in their nature, right? So suppose in one chapter, the practice of asana would be given, and then after a few chapters, then the practice of pranayama would be given. Then in some other text, the practice of meditation would be given, right? So overall, because there are 4 Vedas, so total 4 Vedas are there. So all of this information was quite scattered in its nature, and the Vedas were also quite hard to understand, right? So as the time moved, the Upanishads came in, right? Upanishads were now easier, right, to understand. Everything was given in story format, everything was shared in the form of a conversation, right? So when we have a conversation with someone, right, we tend to remember that thing much more than a normal one-way communication, right? So like when you have doubts, right, and you ask me, so you remember the answer to those doubts for a much longer period of time. Why? Because then each and every doubt that you had, I answered that, then maybe some other question came up out of my answer, right? Then you asked that thing, then I again explained that thing, right? So this conversation style, it helps one to become a part of the knowledge that is being received, right? Hence it becomes easier to grasp also and easier to remember also. So when you read stories, Upanishads mainly consist of stories. So stories, we are able to remember them, right? Stories have their own impact on us. So then the form of Upanishads came in, which was slightly easy uh, than the way of presentation of the Vedas, right? So slowly, as the time moved forward, these things also slowly, began to develop, right? Then two very major forms of practices that were going on in the pre-classical period were actually Buddhism and Jainism. So Buddhism is quite famous around the world. So I'll just spell Vedas, Upanishads, Buddhism, and Jainism all. So Vedas are Vedas. Upanishads are Upanishads. Then we have come to the Buddhism and the Jainism form of passing down yoga. So Buddhism is Buddd, H-I-S-M, and Jainism is J-A-I-N-I-S-M, right? So if you happen to read about the history of Buddhism, you will see this thing that generally accepted time of the existence of Lord Buddha is also 2500 years ago, which is actually coming down to this timeline only. So at this point of time, you can say the major responsibility was taken by these two traditions, and yoga was passed down now in this form, right? So Buddhism and Jainism, they are very, very practical in nature. So in the division of the Indian schools of philosophy, I did write down Buddhism, Jainism, and Charvak in the heterodox schools, right? So these are quite practical in nature, and especially Buddhism is always consistently, it's consistently pushing you to validate the information on the basis of your experience, right? So suppose I keep saying something to you that this is true, this is true, this is true, right? But you have not experienced that thing. So that becomes false information for you. When it comes out on your experience, that is when you validate that truth, right? So Buddha also, he focused on passing down the practices, and he said that keep following and your truth will be determined by your experience, right? So if somebody is saying that this thing is going to happen, that thing is going to happen, so you don't have to confuse the mind with all these things. You stay in touch with your reality, and if the reality changes and takes that shape, then it becomes true for you what is being said, right? So they focused, both Buddhism and Jainism focused heavily on keeping the information equivalent to the experience, right? So at that point of time, because of uh, um, the existence of their particular teachers, these practices became very, very famous, and a lot of people and followers came in contact and took those practices and then incorporated those in the day-to-day life. So even the practice that Siddhartha Gautam gave, it's called Vipassana. So that is also quite rigorous in its nature, and it's not the practice of asana or pranayam, it is a meditative practice, right? So you can also say in the pre-classical period already the environment was such, and the water environment, the food was such that the body was generally very healthy in nature, right? So they could move directly towards the meditative practices. So this preparation of the body that you are doing currently, this was not required or not required too much, right? Like today the world is just focusing on the asana practice. So in earlier times, yoga was more about sitting in one place and just doing meditation, right? Also, there are two very famous epics, one of which we will discuss in the upcoming classes. Ramayana, right, and Mahabharata. Ramayana. Ramayana and Mahabharata. Mahabharata. Ramayana and Mahabharata. So both of these epics were very, very famous, and the way in which the story was written in these epics, it demonstrated the correct way of living or the way of making the decisions, even if you are in a very, very in a kind of situation where it is difficult to take decisions. So Ramayana revolves around the life of Lord Ram, right? And it's like reading, there's some storybooks, you can say, which when you read, you get some moral out of them. So you can consider Ramayana and Mahabharata to be something similar, even though they actually happened. But when they were written down and read as stories, it provided an example for the people to follow these things, right? And Mahabharata, we are going to discuss this because Bhagavad Gita is a part of this famous epic called Mahabharata. So Mahabharata is a very, very long text, but a short portion of it when it was, isolated or similar. We have the class on Bhagavad Gita. I will tell you more about this text. Again, it is the story about two brothers whose children basically were involved in a conflict, and just reading about the story and seeing how they have dealt with the difficulties, right, gives us an example, gives us a path of conducting ourselves more mindfully, and how we can move towards making the correct decisions in our lives, right? So both of these epics, I would say, if you get a chance, you should read them. Don't restrict your mind that they are from a particular religion. They will give you a lot of insight into how you can lead your life. Even though they were written so many years back, they are still relevant. Bhagavad Gita is still being, uh, the teachings of Bhagavad Gita are still being incorporated in the daily work life of people, in the daily lives of people, right? So just keep an open mind, and when you read, you will yourself understand what I am talking about, right? So these few things formed a part of the pre-classical period, and as you can see, because there are so many sources, it was quite scattered in nature, right? Then came the classical period. So slowly, as time moved ahead, the classical period began to transition, and this is when the Yoga Sutras were written, right? Famously known as the Patanjali Yoga Sutra, Patanjal, Patanjal Yoga, Yoga, and then Sutra, Sutra. Again, we are going to have a separate class on this, so I will talk more deeply about this text. But basically, what the author did, so Maharishi Patanjali, what he did was he, put all the information together in one text, right? And this is a very, very short text if you see, right? If you just read what he has written, it is very, very short in its nature, but in order to understand it, there are so many huge commentaries that are given on it. But he basically divided the level of the students depending on how long they were practicing, right? So suppose you have just started the practice, so you are a beginner level student. Then somebody who has been practicing for a while, they will become the intermediate level student, and then somebody maybe who has been practicing for longer than the intermediate level student, they become the advanced level student. So depending on the level of the student, he has given a way or a path to proceed on the journey of yoga, right? So it helps in order to understand one thing, what the practices are. It also helps you to understand what the final point is, why you are doing yoga, right? Like in the previous few classes, we had discussed the definition of yoga according to the Patanjal Yoga Sutra, right? Yoga is chitta vritti nirodha. So over there in the beginning only, he has given you what state of mind you have to achieve, right? So then one thing is what practices are there, what is your final point, and then it also gives you the correct way of approaching these practices, right? So if you are an intermediate level student, then there's few sets of practice that you have to do that will help you to advance in your journey, right? So Patanjali's text became very, very famous. In fact, people existing during his time, they were quite like, when they knew that Patanjali was there, they insisted him to pass down this information as well. So he became the major source, right? From this point on, yoga became quite systematized, right? So now people were not practicing the different processes in an absurd manner. They knew what is the correct way of proceeding on the path, right? After his time, when he went away, right, after his time, the post classical period started. Now the systematization of the Yoga Sutras was still there, right? So the entire knowledge was already systematized. But now the times again, as the time moved forward, people again, they started changing. And when the main person goes away, who has systematized the knowledge or who has given the knowledge, in fact, when that main person goes away, then a lot of mixing takes place, right? So suppose you are practicing some form of meditation, right? So the way in which you understand it, you will pass it down in that way. So you will make one or two changes, maybe in the instruction, maybe in the way that you teach that topic. So slowly, like this, not one fine day everything was gone, but slowly like this, the practice, it started to change in its nature, right? So till the time of Patanjali also, meditation was given a lot of importance, and that was in fact the main practice of yoga, right? When people used to, all the efforts they were putting in, they were putting in so that they could work on the mind, right? So today's focus is more about the work on the body, but earlier the main focus was working on the mind, because this very strong interconnection was seen between the mind and the way in which you are conducting your actions or how you are speaking, right? So their main focus, and in fact their environment also supported it. So in today's world, if you leave everything behind, right, then you are not able to fulfill your responsibilities and at the same time follow through on your spiritual journey, right? But in ancient times, the setup was such that the students used to go and live with the teachers. Their entire lifestyle was changed according to their practices, right? So today, if I ask you, okay, you are doing pranayam, so these are all the tight restrictions that you have to make. So it will become very, very tough for you to do that, because already you are not having that kind of environment. So if more restrictions are imposed, it will become harder for you to incorporate those, right? But earlier, everything was designed in this way only, because spiritual studies were seen as the mm, greatest form of knowledge that one could acquire, right? So now, as the times changed, we enter the post classical period, where now the different yogis who came in, they started adding their own interpretation, they started adding their own understanding, and even the mindset, it shifted. Now the environment wasn't as clean as it used to be, or people, there was more development also that was taking place, right? So people were more interested in the things that were more commercial in nature, right? So now the focus shifted from the kind of, you can say, Gurukul system or boarding kind of system to a place where a person was constantly interacting with the society, and it was seen as an important part of life. This kind of interaction was considered to be very important, so that from one generation to the other, the um, things could be passed down, and also sustenance could be there, right? So now Adi Shankaracharya, he's a very famous yogi. So this is that like I'm just giving an example. This is the time when he gave out his ideology as well, and even the practices of Hatha Yoga, they started to gain a lot of momentum in the post-classical period, because now because the air, the water, the food, it changed. It was causing more disease to us, right? Because more of the things which were not in harmony with nature, they were being done, right? They were becoming a part of the day-to-day life. So even what we consumed, the air around us, all of this, because it changed, we now needed to work on establishing our physical health, right? So practices of asan, pranayam, shatkarma, mudras, these things started gaining much more relevance, and a lot of people propagated these practices, right, at that point of time. Now, when we come closer to the modern time, then in the modern period, again, you will see the mention of yogis like Swami Vivekananda, right? So I will write down a few names, because modern period that has more relevance for us. SWAMIVIVEKANanda. Swami Vivekanand, he became very, very famous. Sri Aurobindo. Wait, let me just. Sri Aurobindo, he developed the system of integral yoga, right? So these gurus, they started coming in, like gaining more momentum in the modern period. So as we came down, earlier we were in the practices of Raj Yoga. I will just write it down. So this is one of the schools of yoga, and we will discuss the main schools of yoga in upcoming classes. So don't worry. Okay, RAJAYOGA. So when your main focus is working on the mind, you are somewhere doing the practices of Raj Yoga. So till the time of Patanjali, Raj Yoga was the main dominating thing, right? People were focused on the meditative practices more and more, right? So that thing eventually began to change, because now when the restrictions were imposed, so if you want to work on the mind, there's some set of rules and instructions that you already by default have to follow, right? So now these same restrictions, they started because the world was changing. It became difficult for people to follow through on those kinds of commitments, right? Like you have to always speak the truth, right? So this is a prerequisite for entering the practice of Raj Yoga, right? So um, uh, it was seen that these rules and regulations, they were forming a lot of guilt in the human mind, and it was better to first prepare the mind in a different manner, right? So if you, like, suppose right now you are doing asana, right? So it is giving you some kind of mental strength. No, when you do the practice and your teacher is counting, and by the end you just want to leave the posture, but you hold on for a few more seconds. So what happens in these few seconds? You develop the mental will, right? So then the rules and regulations were placed later on. So if you see the practices of Hatha Yoga, HATHA, Hatha Yoga, so they are eliminating the rules and regulations, and first they are focusing on the practice of cleansing, on the practice of asana, on the practice of pranayam. So this, all of these practices, what are they doing? They are strengthening the mind, right? So now we are actually trying to come to the practices of Raj Yoga only, but because the times have changed so much, that we need more and more preparation to do that, right? So Hatha Yoga initially became very, very famous, and then even variations of Hatha Yoga started coming, right? So in the modern times, like yogis, they developed their own form of uh, passing down yoga, right? So Swami Vivekanand is the one of the first few examples who, earlier all of this information was restricted to the Asian subcontinent, right? But now with the modern leaders coming in, this information started going outside also, right? So Swami Vivekanand, in fact, gained a lot of fame during his time for passing down the spiritual knowledge in the Western world, right? There were a lot of conferences that he held where he propagated the ideology and the practices of yoga. And that is when the West, wanted to practice yoga more and more, right? Because they saw the benefits, they saw the way in which he propagated the ideas, and it was quite appealing to them that this practice is bound to get some results, right? So modern period is when actually things started gaining more momentum. So modern period is actually the time from 1700s to the 1900s. This is the timeline of the modern period. And once the West also got a hold of the practices of yoga, so now from like till this time, mostly the hatha yogic practices were being practiced by most of the people, right? Even currently, you will see meditation, and meditation in the form that you completely absorb yourself in the practice of meditation. That you will only see a very few people are practicing this thing, right? Apart from this, the rest of the world, they view yoga as a, a way of just keeping the body healthy, right? So after the modern period, the contemporary period started. So in contemporary period, leaders like Osho, right? T. Krishnamacharya, right? So T. Krishnamacharya gave the vinyasa flow, the vinyasa flow that you guys would practice in your classes. So that was given by him. Then Patabai Joyce, he also gave the practice of Ashtanga, which again you guys practice. So these kind of leaders, they started stepping in more, and they developed forms of yoga which were suitable for a different kind of environment, right? So if you come to India, you will see Hatha yoga is mostly practiced because we live in a tropical environment, right? And the heat over here is we get a lot of sun, and the summers generally over here are quite extreme, right? So we don't need so much exercise, so much dynamic flow in order to sweat as much as you guys need it, right? So if you are located in European countries or US, Canada, right? There the cold weather or the winters are quite dominant in their nature, right? So for them, having a dynamic flow, moving the body more and more, right, led to the same amount of sweating that a person sitting in India would have, right? Just by doing the practices of Hatha Yoga, right? So then the variations of Hatha Yoga started coming in. So because sweat is a very efficient way of releasing toxins from the body, right? So the more you sweat during your asana practice, the greater your flexibility gets because toxins are being released. So these modern styles came more into existence. Then contemporary yoga leaders like Sadhguru, like S.N. Goenkaji, who conducts the Vipassana courses, right? These gurus started becoming much more prominent, and they tried to pass down yoga as authentically as possible. and they still are trying. Like Sri Ravi Shankar, he is the founder of the foundation of art of living, right? So these started gaining much more light and highlight, right? BKS Iyengar. So the contemporary yogis, what they are doing is first thing, the practices of Hatha Yoga are going on, right? So it could be any kind of variation also, or the traditional practice of Hatha. Whatever it is, Hatha Yoga is the main practice that is going on today, right? And then another branch of yoga came out because currently, if you see, you guys are able to practice, right? Suppose you are able to do the forward bend properly or the back bend properly, but most of the students that you will teach, they will not be able to do these things, right? So they need somebody who can guide them from the from where they are to the ideal posture, right? So the use of blocks, the use of straps, this started coming in because now even we cannot do the postures properly, right? This is the kind of disease or the level of the environment is that the air you breathe, the water you drink, the food you eat, it is causing more and more one thing disease, and this is the reason why your flexibility is greatly impacted as well, right? So now these practices were mostly modified. So you will see even in your classes, you would learn about some or the other modifications for the asanas. And second thing is therapeutic use of yoga, right? So therapy as a branch of yoga has come in quite recently, right? Because people are ill, right? And they want to use the practices of yoga to cure themselves, right? So suppose somebody is having some kind of mental issue, right? So they might go for the practice of pranayam and they would want to cure that thing. So now the practice which was originally very spiritual in nature and the practice which would lead you to the freedom from all of your sufferings, now it is being restricted or used only for a specific purpose, right? Just for curing a particular ailment. And yoga practices, they have proven to be quite effective in their approach when they uh, lead to the or when they work on a particular disease, basically. But that is not the main aim of yogic practices. So slowly, what we actually have to do in today's time, where we are using yoga mainly as a therapy. Slowly, we have to come to a state of the body which is healthy. Okay, and once the body becomes healthy, then we can move towards the practices of Raj Yoga. And even in the Hatha Yoga books, right? The practices of Raj Yoga are actually given relevance. So Hatha Yogic practices merge into Raj Yogic practices, right? So today's world, it is stuck only in achieving particular asanas, right? They are forgetting the main goal and the aim for which they are doing the practices. Now, putting up Instagram stories, clicking yourself when you are doing certain asanas, this is gaining a lot of momentum, right? And people expect their instructors to have the perfect postures, and they believe that they can also learn the perfection in the postures, right? But they are not moving beyond the practice of postures. Now all they are focused is all of their focus is on the practice of postures, right? Or maximum you will see some people are also teaching pranayam, right? But the world is not moving out of these two practices. They are just stepping stones for the main practice, right? As long as you have this recognition, you should continue your practice. But if your mind is consistently stuck that you want to achieve full split, then you want to achieve handstand, then you want to achieve headstand, then you are getting stuck in the world of asan. And asan practice, it is never ending, right? You can always work a little bit more on your flexibility, you can always work a little bit more on the way in which you are breathing. But you have to understand this thing that they are just stepping stones to the practices of the mind. right? In fact, when Patanjali he described the practice of asana, he said any posture you can adopt where your spine is straight and you are stable and comfortable. That is it. That is the only requirement for asana in Raj Yoga, right? But what we are doing, we are doing headstand, we are doing handstand, right? So we are doing temporary. Asana practice, even though it strengthens you, it gives you flexibility, it is quite temporary in its nature, right? Because finally you just have to choose one posture in which you can sit for a long period of time, right? So next time when you show up on your mat for asana, for the practice of pranayama even, right? People get stuck in pranayama, right? They want to retain the breath for longer periods of time than if they have held the breath for 5 seconds, now they want to achieve 10 seconds, 10 seconds, 20 seconds, right? Madness is going on, right? Don't get stuck in one practice. Next time when you show up on your mat, understand that this practice is going to lead you to the higher practices. And when you change the intention with which you show up on your mat, when this becomes your main focus, then you will see you don't get disturbed by not achieving full split or not achieving headstand, right? Because your focus has shifted now, right? And because you don't get upset, again you release the expectation, then you are also able to achieve it with time and continuous practice, right? So when you step up on the mat with this approach, it is actually going to change the way in which you move your body. Because if you only want to achieve a particular posture, again you will be more stressed, right? Or you will put a timeline on yourself. But when you know it's only going to lead you to more stability in the body, you are able to give yourself more time, right? So start changing your approach little by little, right? And see how it is causing an impact on your day-to-day practice and in general in your life, right? So this is how yoga developed from the main practice of Raj Yoga uh, to adjust itself, changing with the times, right? And today we have come down to two main practices, the practices of Hatha Yoga and yoga as therapy, right? Any doubts in today's session? Are all the timelines clear?
Yes, all clear. Thank
Okay. Oh, great. So contemporary goes without saying, it is after the time period of 1900, right? So we'll close today's session then. Keep your back and neck straight and very gently close your eyes. We will chant Om one time, followed by three Shantis. Take a deep breath in for Om. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. The vibrations. Join your palms together. Gently bow down. We will just begin the day with a sense of gratitude. Begin to rub your palms together. Keep your palms on your eyes. Very slowly, while blinking and looking at your palms, begin to open up your eyes and come back with a big smile. I will see you for your pranayam class in the afternoon. So take care, enjoy classes. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Sorry, I wanted to say that tomorrow I can't attend this
Okay.
a philosophy class.
All right, no worries,
Okay.
no worries. Yeah, no
Okay.
worries.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.